Good.
No, this podcast like the best swag of
No, I'm glad. I just had the idea. I'm like, why not? Why not? As you know, just procrastinating on schoolwork.
well, if you could find finance professor to cop up something work. Like preferably like the direct deposit my bank account, that would be really
Ooh, you should take negotiation, or you probably have more than I have. All right. Well, welcome to week 10, everyone. Thank you for making it. Plenty of food. Grab some more if you'd like. And for people on Zoom, thank you for making it. All right. So this week, first couple of weeks, we talked about kind of the past and the present. Today we talk about the future. And people on Zoom, yeah, let me know if you can't hear me, but I will assume you can. All right. So today will be a bit of kind of an overview. We'll go over a brief recap of stuff we've gone over past weeks. I'll give my soapbox on, and these have question marks, as who knows what the future will be like, but maybe there are a lot of speculative ideas. I think it'd be fun to share, and I've been working on. So there's that. EHRs, data interoperability, and patient experience. And feel free to grab food, people. We have plenty, and stickers. All right. So brief recap of this quarter. First off, it's week 10. Good job, everyone. We've made it. Almost done. So keep at it. And then very quick and opinionated recap. So again, the slides, it's on the shared Google Drive, so you can find that. So first class, it was the kind of the passive EHRs. So basically, the government tried to make it like the internet for healthcare, but it didn't quite work like that, though it did make some progress. Class 2, we talked about like AI/ML and the history of it. So it really like seems, and it is intelligence in a way, but really it's just like these big statistical models, right? Granted, there's a philosophical debate, like, are we all just big statistical models? Like maybe, I don't know. All right, third class. So Mike went through the lab. So using these models and those sort of things might not be as hard as you think, which is super cool. And it's a lot cheaper than you might think, especially like these LLM endpoints. However, just like knowing how to use it, that might be where understanding the context could help a lot. And also interpreting the results, that could be very hard. And there are a lot of good classes here that you can take for that. And then the last class we talked about like open source EMRs and how to deploy some of them, kind of the benefits of open source. Unintuitive thing, just because it's like open doesn't mean it's inherently better. It doesn't mean it's easier. I think the spirit of it, there are a lot of good parts, but also, like, yeah, I don't know. There are a lot of tropes for like, oh, if it's free, then like you're paying with your time or you're paying for something else. So in the open source software case, like you can deploy these things, and then the cost you pay is like, well, hopefully you understand it when you run it, which is great. And then maybe you can contribute back. All right, so today I'll be talking about my soapbox of EHRs and how I think it should be. Opinions are my own, though, Jonathan Chen, who's the advisor for this class, I've been to his lab meetings and he's taught me a lot. Nigam Shah has taught me a lot, among other people on campus, Tina Hernandez, Bouchard, etc. So yeah, but these opinions are my own, very, very strong, but it's been influenced by a lot of people. And there are a lot of, there's going to be a weird mix of ideas. So if there are questions, feel free to stop me. And yeah, and happy to chat more. Okay. So the context of where we've been. So again, remember in the movie, they went to the future. They went back to the present because they could, because they had this car, but we can't do that. So we're stuck in this present that we might not like that much, but maybe there's a way to somehow shape the future that we really want. So how might we think about this? So the first part is the future of EHRs. All right, so an outline. And to start off, okay, this is kind of fun. So I joined the Shaw lab. I was there for maybe like 4 months, and this was like, what was it? This was maybe like April last year. So they were working on a project. It's called Metaline, and it's basically like, oh, can we have this like large open curate data sets to act as a benchmark for these LLMs? Because LLM craze just come out. So it's like a lot of these things in regular industry is like you have a benchmark, and that's how people measure success. Because otherwise, how do you know it's improving? So there's a pretty new person to the lab, smart guy, but maybe a couple years younger than me. His name is Will. I think he's doing interesting research stuff now. And Will, you know, I was working on Metaline, but I was curious like what was going on. So I was like, oh, Will, like how's Metaline going? He was like, yeah, you know, we loaded like 300 EMRs into the LLM today. And I was like, what? Like, what do you say? You know, I'm just like, what do you mean? Like you load 300? And you know, that's the thing in my head. I'm just like, okay, so I'm the EMR guy on campus. And it's like, okay, is now the time to tell them? It's like, okay, this isn't how it works, bud. Or it's like, this is what other people think, or you're just confused people. But then, you know, I kept that in my head and I was like, oh, like, what do you mean by 300 EHRs? And he was like, well, like, you know, so one, you know, EHR is like this one XML file we have, and that's the electronic health record for this patient, right? So it makes sense. So it's basically like a big blob, a big file with a record of all the things that happen to them. It's electronic, it's a health record. I'm like, huh, that actually makes a lot of sense. And then, you know, I don't know if any of you know Scotty Fleming. Then he was like, oh yeah, we load these EHRs. I'm like, man, this totally makes sense, you know? So I thought about some more. And then I realized like at this time I was also looking into like startup-y stuff. And I was like, huh, like EHR means different things to different people. So, you know, like every time I talk to clinicians, they talked about the UI, but every time I talk to like the researchers, they talk about the database. So what is it? Is it the data? Is it like the record part? Is it like the UI? So it's like the system of record, kind of historically. Is it this monster? Is it what everything bad about what healthcare represents? You know, DEHR and this loaded gun of things. Is it something else? So yeah, it was interesting. So maybe the literal interpretation is like, oh well, duh, it's just like electronic health record, right? It's just the record. You know, it's the data. Simple. But then, you know, I worked in industry. I'm like, actually, you know, the way people use it, it's like this SaaS platform that everyone uses. And then you talk to people that are really in the industry and they're just like, man, it's just so much, you know, like it, yada, yada, yada. You got to understand Chronicles and Kabuto and you got to get certified, yada. This big, you know, IT, it represents everything, which could be a lot. So I've mentioned a couple of times I worked at an EHR startup after Epic. It was called Campus Medical. And the thing I really found compelling about their pitch at the time, they were really focused on the UI. So instead of like kind of binding yourself to like this big monstrosity of a system, if you created a more modular system, then you can just focus, okay, like these people will focus on this UI, and then you can be more flexible, and then you can kind of collaborate, have it be more custom, so that you're not like bound by, oh, if you get this one piece, you need to have all 20. You know, you could say like, hey, like maybe they could be more like shopping apps, you know, that kind of thing. And then an even more recent idea, which we talked a bit about Medplum. So that might be even more of a shift towards like, okay, actually it's just the database. So it's like, it's the way to organize all of the data. We'll take even a less of an opinion about all the stuff you layer on top of it. You can just plug and play whatever you want. That's the hope of it. And I think that's what Canvas is kind of trying to do now. So people are like, all right, SaaS really loves it's a clinical database. But you know, clinicians, like people in the room, it's like, oh, you know, it's the SaaS platform. Like that's the thing I want to fix, right? That's the thing I spend all day in. Okay, so this is a bit opinionated. What makes a good abstraction? So I just pulled up Wikipedia, so people won't fight me. But you know, abstraction is just like, okay, can you take an idea and can you communicate to someone, and it just encapsulates enough context so they can get it, but then maybe you can like work together and have a shared idea. There are a shared set of rules, and it kind of like groups things together, you know, nicely. So like in CS, like I don't know, like like no one actually like teaches this, I think, explicitly. Like you might take a programming language class and they'd be like, oh, like we'll teach you data classes, and you can make like you know, you learn about inheritance. You can make an animal class, and like a dog class is an animal and stuff like that. But like a lot of this stuff might be more like style based. Okay, so what I think makes a good abstraction, and I've got a lot of advice from a lot of people on this. All right, so first off, hopefully it's clear, and you know, in the ideal case, it's not ambiguous. Like if you say, you know, this idea like in EHR, like you know, like everyone knows what you're talking about. That's the goal. Like if you say like, oh, I'm talking about X, then you don't need to explain anything else. Like people just get it. Hopefully you can keep it focused because you can't boil the ocean. It's also consistent. So if you say in different places, it just like won't magically switch up on you. Hopefully it's information dense. So, you know, if the abstraction is too loose, then, you know, again, like you might like one end is like you're so specific that it's not useful, but the other end is like you're so ambiguous that it really means nothing. So that's the tricky balance, and there's no perfect answer to this. So information dense, hopefully there's a way you can capture the context of whatever you're talking about. Not overlap, because then that makes things ambiguous. And there's this idea in like programming called like encapsulation, which is basically like you don't need to talk about the details if they don't care about it. So you have the option to like, and that's what actually like APIs like focus on, of like, oh, we'll give you this endpoint. We'll say like, there might be a search endpoint, and you'll say like, okay, you just need to tell me the keyword you're looking in, and I'll promise you I'll return this, but I don't need to tell you all the details of how it works. And you might not care about the details of how it works. Yeah.
Question for encapsulation.
Mhm.
Hiding the metadata?
A good question. It's just broader. It's more just like hiding how you implement it. Yeah, yeah. So just hiding the details. So the idea would be like if I have like, I don't know, like uh, in the AI lab, you saw there's like the OpenAI, you can pip install the OpenAI module, and then you can like make requests to it, yada, yada. So that's an example of encapsulation where for that library, like they just want to make it easy for you to send web requests to the OpenAI endpoints, but they encapsulate in the sense like, oh, we'll give you these wrappers of like, oh, this is like, the model class, this is the model client, and you can, send a chat completion or something like that. And under the hood, the idea is like, you actually don't need to care about what they do under the hood, but they've kind of made this contract, and you'll follow it, and hopefully the contract better fits how most people think about it. Yeah, or just like basically, like same idea. It's like, how do you organize the function? Like what's a good function size? Because again, like you could say like, oh, my function takes like 10 parameters, including your name, for every person that runs it. And then it's like, okay, you could do that. But then there might be ways to reorganize that. So you call things less, etc. Hopefully that's clear or helpful. Cool. That's a good question. Okay. Last thing, hopefully like your abstractions are like user friendly. So then like people actually want to build it, because just because you have abstraction, and no one's perfect at this, doesn't mean it's worth using, or people want to use it, right? But it's always good to work on it, respect where people are at, and hopefully make the community inviting. All right, so this is my strong opinion. EHRs are a fake abstraction. All right, so it's really misleading, because I was trying to pitch to people, like, oh, I work with health records, yada yada, and I just realized like, yeah, everyone just meant a different thing. So I don't think it's good to represent the SaaS platform. The reason I feel this way, yeah, you say EHR just means different things to different people, and that just comes with the fact that the SaaS platform is like a UI and a database, and either people care about the UI or they care about the database, or they care more about one or the other. Now, I call it fake because it's not completely irrelevant. So again, remember back in 1979 when electronic health records first came out, there were these big compute machines. That's what they were. It was like the EHR was linked to these huge monolithic machines. So it was like the system of record. It made sense to call them EHRs because computers costed millions of dollars. But now they don't. Like everyone has a computer in our pocket. It's a phone, and it's like, I don't know, 10 million times faster than the old computers. So the world's changed so much. This just kind of stuck because I don't know, people didn't know what else to call it. So yeah, that's why it's fake. The name isn't user friendly. Like, I TA'd a class, and it was just hard to explain this stuff. And also, like health and medical are very broad things. Like what constitutes health? What is a medical record? Like, is my address a medical record, right? It's part of my medical record, all that stuff. Aren't we all patients anyways, right? By default, which is one thing I like remind myself, because sometimes just write like people obsess over the medical record part, and then you write the code. It's like, oh, just like, regular CRUD with like addresses and like names. I'm like, man, like, what's the medical part? So hopefully this is a way to bring it back. But really, I think people just want to think it as like, okay, you have clinical data, it's just organized somehow, and you have a UI that works with it. And that's it. I think that's what people really want, right? But it's been entangled into this EHR idea for a while, and for, as we've seen, valid reasons. Okay, so this legacy thinking just kind of makes it hard to build on top of. And I think that's part of the challenge of why culturally, we like health tech, honestly, just hasn't attracted the best talent. There's just less money. And also, now you come in and it's like, oh, like what's an EHR? Like, how do I build with Epic? And people, instead of being like, oh, here's the docs and here's how you play around with it, people are like, oh, like, you got to talk to my boss, or just like, oh, we got to set you up with this like TST sandbox, but it'll take like 3 weeks. By that time, you've lost them, right? It's just like, all right, like he or she like just does not want to like do this anymore, or maybe they have better options, which they probably do. So that's what makes EHRs hard. They're treated as infrastructure. but really they encapsulate these legacy things. So I really think naming is important. And I think FHIR is like people love the idea of it because it pushes more towards the ethos of like kind of open collaboration and stuff, but it won't fix it on its own. But it will give the opportunity for these kind of things. Clinical data has a lot of baggage, as you all know, but interesting to think about. This is not a unique problem. Like every industry has this problem, though there might be more legalese in healthcare. All right, so this is a little diagram I made for a side project I was doing. So this is just, I'll kind of frame it as like servers and clients. So traditionally, like in, computer land, people called it servers and clients or server client architecture because they're like big computers and they're little computers. Similar idea, they still kind of call it that. But yeah, like a lot of interactions are kind of governed by the server. And when I say governed, it might be like informally, they just have most of the power, right? They have most of the sway over. It's like, it's like if I paid for, like this, hospital visit and, I generated all these tests, like why am I gatekept to going through all the institutions that I've been to? Why can't I just have it? Why? Because it's mine, right? It's like I paid for it, right? And I have a legal right to it. But it's just like a lot of the infrastructure now like caters towards servers. And as we'll talk a bit more about later, everyone will bring up the reasonable ambiguous things like, oh, we don't want a HIPAA violation or we want to protect your privacy. That's why we won't give you your data. It's like, like, well, that makes sense, but also like, hasn't everyone else solved this? Though it's hard. So this client server paradigm, opinion, again, these are all opinions, strong opinions. I think the current landscape really prioritizes the server-based thinking versus the regular internet really prioritizes users, clients. So now this is interesting. So if you think like, yes, the servers are right, and we should just keep it as a SaaS platform. That's what the EHR is. Then, so I mean, I guess people have heard about the personal health record. So I worked on like I worked with a couple people, and we like for a while it's like, man, like why don't you just make a PHR startup? First it's like, oh, it doesn't make money. Then you get in the middle, it's like, oh, all these things. But then you're like, wait, actually, like if you just had the data and you made it user friendly, like that'd be useful and people would want that. So why doesn't it happen? And then I started to realize like, okay. So if you believe, like if you live in a world where servers dominate, then a PHR makes sense because, in EHR, like HR stands for health records. If health records like a system, then it's like, okay, a PHR right now is just like an app that lets you manage your records. It's a record management thing. But if you really believe that like people should have their data and it should be like shared more freely, kind of like in the regular internet, then PHR doesn't make sense. Like, like the EHR should just be our data. It's just like, yeah, there shouldn't be anything magical about PHR app, right? Like, why do I need a dedicated app to manage my medical records? Like, shouldn't just all of the apps that need it just have it, right? Maybe Apple Health is like pushing more towards that where you could get your records. But again, this is interesting too. People ask me like, why doesn't Apple just win? Maybe they will, but the reason I think it'll be slower is because they are in the first world. Like they are still catering to the servers because that's like the best practice. Yes.
By Google Fall, things that tried to make like a pseudo PHR, just like positioning and the timing and the business model didn't make any sense because I had a Google Health Vault back.
Oh, nice. Yes.
Health Vault.
Yes, that's one of them. Yeah.
They just like did not sync up for any of the things I wanted to do, so I've had to centralize my records.
Yes. No, that's a great question. Subjectively, I think it's just like it's hard to be innovative at a very large company. So it's cool that they tried it, but then they probably got to some meeting where it's just like, oh, but how does this make money? And so one, it doesn't make money. Two, like it's great that you're like an engaged user, but most people aren't. So I think like maybe in the back office, they're like, oh, if we make, we're a great consumer product, people, they are. And then if we make the best health consumer app and people use health records, then we'll have a gateway to all this health data, which would be so valuable. But the problem was, unfortunately, if you trust like the current leaders in health tech, they're all like the server people, like they're like the big EHR vendors, like Epic, Cerner, or whatever. So if you play by their rules, then you're already at a disadvantage. But it makes sense. Yeah.
Later, back in, say, towards the end of the Bush administration, beginning of the Obama administration.
Yeah.
Spent a lot of money to say, hey, you had to be certified to do meaningful use.
Yes.
So that was a huge push to get at least large academic medical centers and people with budgets to go on Epic and Cerner.
Yep.
So do you think we need to have something that's almost like a government top-down initiative to do that for PHRs? Because maybe individuals won't do it on their own, or there's not enough money flowing into the ecosystem.
Yeah, that's a good question. So for people on Zoom, it's like the government spent all this money to get people ONC certified, and that's how they're able to push EHR adoption. Should there be something similar for personal health records? I think that's what they're trying. So I'll talk a bit about this later. Like there's a legislation people might have heard called TEFCA, which has to do with like qualified health information networks or QHINs. And technically, I'll talk more about this later, but a QHIN technically needs to allow patient access. This was something I looked into too, and I actually like talked to the founder that looked into this, Jason Kolatunga. He's working on a startup called Fasten Health, which started as an open source PHR, which is super cool. And basically, I'm like, yeah, like you're open source PHR, you're a good product. Why can't you just say TEFCA and then give me my records? And the pragmatic answer is like, and I won't share this or anything, but or like he just told me like, okay, apparently they just told me like tough luck, like less than 0.1% of queries or something were actually patient access queries. So they just like, it was like something that technically the law required, but it was hard to enforce. And it was, no one's going to sue over that. So just kind of tough toenails. Yeah. Yes.
It's also a fundamental service patient expectation kind of mismatch here where
Yeah.
obviously we all have rights of access to our data. There are laws and legislation that give us access to it. But the tools that we have aren't widely publicized.
Yep.
And then let's just say, yeah, you get access to your health data. Okay, so what?
Yeah, now what?
You get you're still going to the doctor. Like
Yep.
The system itself isn't, and this is what Professor Schulman keeps going on about, isn't geared with this idea of patients being at the center and owners of their own data.
Yep.
So requires a larger system-wide change in terms of what data ownership actually means for frontline activity, which
Yep.
no one ever seems to strategy.
Exactly. And it's hard too, because like it's, data ownership is vague. A lot of things aren't necessarily catered to the patient, but that's just how they were designed first. And as you all know, like you can't turn off in healthcare, right? Like lights always have to be on. So analogy like people have told me that is helpful. It's like you got to somehow change the plane while you're flying it. So, and that's why maybe regular tech things like don't work, because you could take Facebook down for 3 days and like maybe the world will be a better place. I don't know. Right? And then they'll update all the servers and like people will be fine, right? Though, they do have impressive uptime, whatever. Like they obsess about that. But like, yeah, you can't take down a hospital for 3 days, or you can, but like, yeah, people really suffer then. So that becomes a problem. And maybe it ties into this. Like, traditionally people thought of it more servers. That's just how it evolved. But really, we moved to a world where everything else is like client-centric, like more towards consumer based. Why can't healthcare move towards that? Maybe it should. And maybe like the naming or the thinking behind it might be holding it back a bit. But it exists for a reason, so we should respect that. All right, so this is one thing I keep telling people. So I think health tech is like maybe 10 years behind regular tech. So we're about 2000, we're in 2024. That means if we look back at 2014, okay, what was happening then? It was like, okay, APIs, like cloud SaaS, early deep learning. And we kind of see this like, oh, like what's a lot of the deep learning stuff now in healthcare? It's imaging, right? And that's the same kind of imaging that, I don't know, like ResNet came out around here, all that stuff. But what if we could just skip all that? We can just learn from the past and we live in the present and all these things exist. So what if we just thought really hard and we could skip all that? Well, it's still very hard because it won't look exactly the same, but maybe there might be patterns. But we don't need the same thing if we don't need it. So again, so the web 1.0, and again, there are maybe more rigorous definitions, but started with like this ARPANET project, evolved into the internet. We had email, and then the really savvy people started hosting. And I know people remember, I'm a 90s kid. Like people remember those websites with like the fun cursors or like, yep. It's like all that vibe. So that was the fun of like expressiveness of web 1.0. People, it's like you could host your server, express yourself however you want. And people really had fun with that. And it was fun. Then web 2.0 came, and that's where and the cool thing about web 2.0, which we're kind of living in now, is like that's where technology became accessible. Like tons of people, like everyone could have their own phones. Everyone could make a Gmail account or a Yahoo account. It was just normal. Like browsers were a big thing. This is where But the thing people were complaining about is like, oh, well, what happened to the fun we had, back in the old web day, right? And it came up for good reasons because like, the people in Web 1.0, that might have been like all the computer geeks. So they're just having fun in their little club and then open out to the rest of the world. And most people just want to, you know, log into their bank or like check their email, and that's fine. That's completely fine. But then people argued like, oh, too much power is centralized into these servers. So then there's this idea of Web 3.0. So will it work? This like, decentralized compute with like blockchain and non-fungible tokens. But all it is like, instead of having all these central servers, like the ethos of it is, could we have a way to agree on stuff in a decentralized way? And then power will be, we can shift the power from these big central, big tech and then into like consumers and like, like have ways for individual users to contribute more. Will this take off? So I think the tough thing, very subjectively too, I have the note on this later. I lost money on crypto, so I'm a little salty. But like the thing that makes Web 3.0 hard is just like the ideas are compelling, but the consumer use cases just aren't there. So I think it's just rich people trading money right now. But non-investing advice, like, yeah, I could have made a lot. So LLMs, and this is the stuff that people are excited with AI in terms of like, oh, it seems to have the hype around like early Web3, but it's actually applicable. Like it was immediately useful to people of like, oh, I could ask ChatGPT stuff and it just made sense. So I think we're here for health tech. It's just really behind, but the crazy thing is just like all the technology exists, but like all the reasons for adopting it, all that stuff makes it hard. Yes. Oh, question. That's a artificial general intelligence. So it's like people having those fun debates of like, oh, like, is there a world where computers are smarter than us? Where subjectively, I think that is not any of our problems. Like that would be like 2 generations later. Yeah. Cool. Yeah, that's a good question. Okay. So what might the right abstraction for EHRs be? All right, so yeah, I thought about it. I'm like, yeah, I think Will was right. Like it should just be the patient data. Every time we say EHRs, it should just mean like, yeah, it's just the records I have. So, and then we might move towards a world where there's a database that organizes these EHRs, these, records. And then there are apps that use my EHRs and I just have my EHR with me. It's just on my phone or it's just like on a USB drive, whatever. It should be easy. And it doesn't restrict the health system too from kind of saying like, oh, well, Epic's my EHR. So that means like they're my database system and I need to use all the Epic apps. No, it's just like people could just, you have all your data organized in one place and then there's more flexibility in what you use. And that's, I think, what the government's pushing for too. But for all intents and purposes, because I'm teaching, the EHR just means the SaaS app, but maybe this is the future, right? Okay. If there are no questions, we'll talk about the future of data interoperability. So again, interoperability is like the ability to exchange data between systems. I think the core problems, like it comes down to like trust. And then after the trust is established, like how do you actually do it? So implementation. I'll talk a bit about QHINs, which are these qualified health information networks, a bit of what's happening now. So this was one thing I looked into this summer. Was like the thing that drove me crazy was like HIPAA and like people, wave it over your head but no one's read it. Like no one's read it. That drives me crazy. And so I looked a bit into that and talk about that. And then some ideas that I've been looking into. We'll see if they happen. All right. So the core problems. First, like what is trust? So I'm not an expert or anything, but maybe trust is how you can share something that is sensitive or private and feel safe with someone. Feel like, okay, I can do this with this person, entity. I trust you. You're placing your confidence in something. I think this was the Merriam-Webster dictionary definition. And obviously, when there are more sticks, when the thing feels more sensitive, or you feel like you have more to lose, you're going to need more trust, right? So implementation of interoperability in this case, this answers the question of like, okay, assume we trust each other. Like, how do we, exchange now, right? It's like, so the problem isn't I trust you. It's like, now it's like logistics. So there's computer-based interoperability, which is like, you need somewhere, to run it. Like you need a computer, you need to run a program, you need to make it secure, and then you need to like kind of speak the same language. I'll call that data mappings. So it's like data, like I could format all my data in my way, but if you don't know my way, like you can either, like how are you going to translate it to your way, right? And the old-fashioned way, you don't need computers, right? You can just call someone. I think that's why calling is so effective in healthcare. Just like fax people. That's what the fax machine does. Or you can just talk to them, you say like, hey, I trust you, or we're coworkers. Like, yeah, like, Bob told me this, yada, yada. And then all that jazz. All right, so now QHINs. What's a QHIN? So HIN is a health information network. And it was basically, I don't know when it started, but the government, they're at all different levels of government. So it's regional, state, and federal HINs. And they originally, when EHRs were older, they were like, okay, we should make these middle organizations, again, server-based thinking, that will basically be like a boys and girls club of different health systems in the area. They'll say like, hey, like you pay membership, be part of my club. We'll solve the trust problem for you. Like we vetted everyone, and then we'll also help with the connection problem. So then we'll have one standard and we'll do the work to mangle everyone else's standard, right? Really, it's just a middleman. And like, no one really liked that. So then, but they exist, right? And they've grown over the time. And the government now is just like, man, like we have all these HINs in like, it isn't interoperable. And now that's a big problem. We invested all this money, it is digital, but we can't ship it. How will we get everyone to agree? So they create these things called QHINs. It's like, okay, so there seem to be a couple of HINs that everyone really likes and like, connect to most people. Because most of these HINs, like if you connect your 5 local clinics, that's important, obviously. What you really want is those 5 local clinics can connect to anywhere in the US, all like 10,000, 100,000, whatever. So these QHINs were like the largest ones. They're like, okay, we will make up these kind of rules of, if you want to be considered a QHIN, that means like you will get extra government backing. And the people that we have this like trusted, this framework that's mostly like kind of logistical of like, oh, you send the data this way, or if you send a query, you need to support these types of queries, like a patient query or request for access. And then there's going to be an unbiased third party that reviews whether or not someone qualifies as a QHIN. But if you're a QHIN, the idea is like, oh, you have a lot of power in terms of saying, I'm a QHIN, and you should kind of sign up with me. So interestingly, I mentioned I forgot which one, there's a group called the Sequoia Project that's a nonprofit. So they have like different interoperability matters, workshops, patient engagement workshops. They're the RCE, so they have the contract from the government for the next 5 years. So that's kind of interesting. And yeah, like all this is public stuff, so feel free to see the docs. Yes. Yep.
Is it just a matter of meeting certain technical standards, or are there also things like data privacy, like business model, like how rigorously are you screened?
Yeah, good question. So the question was like, if you want to be a QHIN, what do you need to do? Definitely check the government website. I've skimmed a couple of them. I've skimmed some docs, so I'll just say what I remember or what I think. Basically, like TEFCA is this like technical framework of like, oh, you need to have like these security protocols implemented. Simple stuff like maybe, well, not like very much done but non-trivial, like TLS and like I don't know, different types of. You need to support different types of messages, and you also need to guarantee a certain amount of like uptime or something. It's like you need to guarantee uptime. You also need to guarantee like, I think it's a bit convoluted. There, like the thinking was, oh, we want anyone to be able to participate in this. So it's like okay, I'll just give you the ballpark of what I remember. Like, I think it's like within so a QHIN is made up of maybe a bunch of small HINs or whatever. It's just like, it was something like you can't balance a certain, like for every query, you can't have more than like 3 redirects or something like that. Something obscure like that.
Last question.
Yeah.
Who can access that?
Yes.
Say you're a consumer.
Yeah.
And you're interested in having your customers health information for whatever reason.
Yes.
But not by them.
Yes. Yep.
Is it perfectly acceptable for you to sort of be in this?
Yeah. That's a good question. So the question is like, do they let anyone in TEFCA, for example, if you're a consumer app and you have the consent of your patient, whatever? And the short answer is theoretically yes, if you can prove that, your patient is part of you, but unfortunately, I don't think there's any way to prove that the patient part right now. So like and I can share it later. So like Jason, the founder, I talked about, like, so his open source project is Fast and Health. He's actually like pivoted to doing more like data interoperability SaaS stuff, but the repo is still open source. And part of it, and he did a really great job with this. He documented all of because his app is patient-centric, he documented all the instances of him reaching out to different organizations saying like, hey, like by law, you should have this. And then he documented what they told him. So yeah, so that's open source. So I can send that later. Yeah.
That'd be great.
Yeah, which is awesome, but a lot of it's tough toenails, which sucks because then like people don't want to build in this space. And it doesn't get fixed, but hopefully one day. All right. And this is like the website of the QHINs look. And oh, how aspirational, we're just like, yeah, we all want public good and seamless flow of health information. But what are these QHINs really? It's like, oh, join the network. And what does it mean to join the network? You pay dues, okay? And again, it's totally reasonable. You got to do this somehow. But if you look, it's like, if I make less than 2 million in revenue, then I got paid like 12K a year. It's like damn, it's like that's a lot. If you like here I am sitting is like, man, how am I going to build a SaaS or how am I going to build an app where people pay $20 a month? And this is 12K a year, to do what? Granted, they've done a lot, but to say it's like, this kind of feels like what the internet does, but they've gated it. And the reason, again, reasonable, they say it's like, oh, we need a lot of work does go into it, and a lot of work goes into like how do we trust people, yada yada. But yeah, like it just feels weird, doesn't it? At least to me. So will they work? I don't think so. But I think it'll do a lot of good now, which it is. Like if you're a provider, you can have your your provider number, I forgot. MPI, there we go, thanks. Yeah, the MPI. You can have your MPI and then connect to it easily. But having the checks are good, but like, yeah, the spirit of it just feels off. Like, and I'll talk more about this, but like, I think they're playing like a zero-sum game, like this winners and losers game. There's this idea called the infinite game. Simon Sinek wrote a book, but I think like the idea's been out there for a while or multiple people where it's just like, okay, not all games have to be win-lose. Like you can have games that are win-win. So it depends on the scenario. But here, like, yeah, everyone just virtue signals like, we're helping patients. And then like, what is it? It's like, okay, you pay to be a part of this network. And you don't even know before you join if it's good or not. So it feels ridiculous, but some people just have to do that. Part of the challenge, this actually happened this year, and Brendan Keeler went over it. So there's a lawsuit against Epic. So Epic is part of one of the big QHINs, and there's a startup called Particle Health. And basically what Particle Health does is they have an API for working, I think, with like they had an API to work with the HINs. So the idea was like if you're a regular developer and you want to work with a HIN, but you don't want to learn the obscure data standards, then they have a nice API and they'll do that negotiation and mangling. So yeah, like basically they got to be a part of the QHIN, but then Epic, and this is what happens, I forgot, I think it's a patient safety escalation. And Epic does a great job of taking these very seriously for like even the most obscure things. But Epic had a patient security escalation. That means all the support people need to bring this up to their customers and like they have a fix and they focus on it. And basically the argument was like, yeah, like there's an edge case in Particle where like you could leak PHI to someone that's not authorized to it. Now, did this happen or not? Like maybe not, but the argument was valid. Like, okay, it has a technical foundation. Not to say like a bunch of PHI got leaked, but it's like, oh, it could happen. So yeah, so then they basically got Particle kicked off of the QHINs, and Particle was like, this doesn't seem right. And then there's a big, I don't know, I forgot what happened, or you should look it up, but oh, they settled. Yeah. Does that mean like did anyone win? Okay, yes, yeah. So yeah, that's why like the spirit of the QHINs, like again, everyone wants to share a goal, but like stuff like this happens. And again, it all comes from like reasonable foundations, but that's why things feel off. Okay, so how do you get everyone to share? So there's this idea of like a zero-sum thinking versus infinite game thinking. So not all games need to be zero-sum. So some are necessarily zero-sum, right? There's a winner or a loser. Like a sports competition, right? Like if it's a sport, if it's a competition, someone's got to win, someone's got to lose. But there's an infinite game within the sports game, which is love for the game. It's just like, hey, like you can compete. There might be a winner or a loser, but if you're all good sportsmanship and you all like play to get better, that's the infinite game, And there are ways to have both, but not all games need to be zero-sum. So the I don't trust you problem, like from a zero-sum perspective, like you might frame it as everyone just needs to trust me. And then, you solve it. And the idea is like, oh, like I want to win. I want to be the winner. The infinite game thinking is like, okay, how can we make it impossible for anyone to mess up? So then anyone, you follow these rules and you can participate. And then the second problem of this data interop, it's too much effort to translate. So the zero-sum is, okay, if I'm the only one that knows how to translate, then everyone needs to go through me. I will be the only connector and I can leverage that. But the infinite game thinking is, if I have a way to translate this for everyone, then we can just all move on to better problems, right? No one wants to deal with this problem. So unfortunately, but also reasonably, a lot of thinking, myself too, I've gone through this. A lot of thinking interop is kind of zero sum because people want to win. But again, this is like, we also want to move on to more interesting things with our lives. So there's some ideas from cryptography. So I took the graduate cryptography class. So cryptography is like, how do you like basically transmit secrets, but only have the intended targets know the secret? So, very old days, just like cipher, text, yada, yada. But now there's advanced math techniques, public key, private key, whatever. And this is like, so the first day of lecture, like Dan Benet, he teaches it, great class, CS255. Yeah, this really resonated with me because there's no security by obscurity in cryptography. Like it doesn't matter if everything's open source, your system needs to mathematically be secure. Everything's open except the keys. And then it doesn't matter if they know exactly how it's implemented. So that's the idea in cryptography. And the cultural benchmark is like, you need to prove within a 2 to the negative 80 probability that you can't tell the difference between two examples. And it's hard to do, and you need to do math, but it was a great class. It's different from info security because info security is like broadly, how do we like design secure systems? And again, this is why when you do HIPAA training, it's part of the law that you need to go through a module on phishing or whatever, because like any system with humans involved, like you could always have like a whistleblower or something. So there's no like 100% probability guarantee if people are involved. So that's why everyone needs to kind of be virtue signally about it, because you need to, just in case, right? Because no one can guarantee these things, but it might cause more trouble than it is. And there's a networks. I didn't take this class, but it is out there. Okay. So there's a book, and I've read maybe a couple chapters, but it's called Read, Write, Own by Chris Dixon. He's a big Web3 guy, and he makes a good distinction in the book about like, there are people that really care about, cryptography, the traditional math people. That's like the computer side. But then you have the people that are just trying to make money and like, okay, well, you want to create this open community where everyone can participate, right? But and inadvertently, I think like most of cryptocurrencies have attracted many people on the right. Like, what is a Bored Ape? Like, does anyone know what that is? Well, this is crazy. So like an NFT, and it took me forever to figure this out. It's just a way to prove that you are this exact point on a blockchain. And they're like, oh, if we associate it with that in an image, then we can sell it to people. But it's, you know what I mean? So it's like, oh, you're selling like, a $10,000 JPEG because you can say like, oh, I have proof on this blockchain that I am the owner of the JPEG. That's it. And it's like, wow, they're able to trick a lot of people to buy a lot of Bored Apes. Like, that's crazy. It's like, what? Like, why did I study healthcare? Right? It's like, I could be in a yacht or something. I'm like, you know what? No, I'm doing the right reason. So anyways, the whole schlick on that. So there are people that are working on these like really interesting problems and want to, make things more egalitarian, but also necessarily when you make the crowd open, you might attract a different crowd. Okay, so HIPAA, how do you mitigate these risks? Okay, so I had a typo on the week one slides, which I've updated. So I put health information portability. It's health insurance portability. So everyone gets this wrong. Like even I got it wrong. I've been reading this forever. Yeah, HIPAA is on health insurance. So why are we just so strapped with dealing with HIPAA? Because they had this privacy rule. Again, the intent was like, okay, an insurer couldn't leverage information they had about you, pre-existing conditions, that sort of thing. But the world got more digital, and then we have all these things, and no one wants to get sued. Like, I read the thing on the right. It's a summary of the legislation, and the summary was like 20 pages and super dense. So I read the summary, and it's like, yeah, it's something like, I don't know, something like you pay per record and there's base fine, and also like the person can go to jail. Now, I don't know how many cases this actually happens. I think it's very low, but technically in the law, like if you have a HIPAA violation, you can go to jail. And it's like, damn, they made it really serious for what it is. But obviously, we all want to protect patient privacy. In organizations, you need to notify people of a HIPAA breach if it happens, and you don't know who exactly you breached it, usually if you get hacked. So then it's just this huge like PR scandal. So no one wants to get sued. And that's why everyone just tries to avoid it. But again, you can't guarantee like security by obscurity. So then this is the server-dominated world we live in. And here's the thing. If we made everything client-centric, it would be hard to guarantee this security thing, right? Because you can't hand out data left and right. How do you prove who's who? Yada, yada. So it's like, could we take ideas from cryptography? So this is an idea that I presented a poster on this past summer. And I will see through in some capacity of like, basically, can we have a protocol that has a shared blockchain? The blockchain would be used to hold metadata to prove like who has what. And then everyone in the protocol has like a pair of public-private keys, which is the standard way of cryptographic transactions happen. So in this protocol, you would need some sort of client app that gave everyone keys, but instead of just like you have keys for the sake of it, everyone would be linked by the shared blockchain, and the blockchain would be public. And it wouldn't have PHI, it'd just be like, oh, like you can see like patient A had something to do with health system A. So when health system B has an appointment for patient A, they don't know exactly what happened, but they know to ask, who to ask, right? And they can say like, okay, I asked hospital A and did they play nice with me? And it will be on this kind of ledger forever. So hopefully that could help everyone share. Like you can use this as the basis of, we can all agree beforehand that we want to play nice. So this will be the system maybe to help force everyone to play nice in different ways. Not foolproof and still early, so, but happy to chat about it. All right. What about the next part? That's just getting people to trust each other. So like the second part is like, once you get people to trust each other, how do you share it? Okay, so I still think the main bottleneck is the trust part. So like there are just current ways of like, once you trust someone, you can just straight up fax it, it's like those methods are solved. They're not scalable, but they're solved. So there are enough resources, but it might not be compelling. But the problem that I've been stuck on is writing the data mapping code. So it's like writing the code to translate the data. That is like an unseen barrier, because even after you get all the trust happening, maybe a barrier to like, oh, I don't trust you is also like, even if I did trust you, I would need to, take 3 engineers and staff them out for 3 months. I can't do that, right? So that might make that conversation harder. Kind of like language. If everyone just spoke their own language, it'd be hard. But every individual says like, well, it'd be easier for me if you spoke my language. So we can all agree with that. And here, like data mapping code, it's not hard, it's just tedious. So it's just a lot of like got yous, a lot of like, oh, like you can't index into a dictionary with an int, or oh, it's like this needs to be a float, not an int, stuff like that. So here we are, back to OMOP on FHIR. So I gave a talk at FHIR Dev Days last year about OMOP on FHIR. I thought I was done. I did this at Georgia Tech. It's just been all over the place. I presented a poster on it. Maybe people would be interested in the code. And everyone was like, oh, that's cool, Eric. That's awesome. Can't wait till you fix it. And I'm like, great, great. And then I went to my compilers class. I'm like, wow, like this just keeps coming up, because I'm thinking about like domain-specific languages and what's the problem in my head is OMOP on FHIR. And now we get to this class. It's like, wow, wouldn't it be great if this was solved? And the thing I really want to do is like, wow, there are these interesting clinical projects. We can think of semantics of patients or how some systems operate more specifically, how different maybe like disease strains or how they get documented, that kind of stuff. But like, yeah, I just haven't been able to do it because like you get to the thing and it's just like, oh, well, we need to translate like our data stored in OMOP and like all these values, like, yeah, it's a lot of information gets lost in the middle. So the hope is like if you solve the middle problem, then people can the information isn't lost and they can solve these other problems. So this is the base problem. You have just CSV and you want to take each row and convert it to a JSON, but you want to go back and forth and there might be some loss in the middle. So the idea I've been working on, it's a Python library called Pydian. And the idea is you can have a framework to make it easier to write this code and also make it easier to share. So it's like here, like, we've cut the number of lines needed by, maybe 7 lines. But if you look here, like you might, and this isn't hard code, but you look at this, it's like, man, I don't even want to think about this. There's like if, yada, yada. But here, this is interesting. And this was the idea that motivated this. This code kind of looks like this data, right? It's just like, this research type has 1 line and it does this thing, etc. Or this birth date has this 2 lines and it, lines up there. So the idea is like, if you can make the code more readable and also have some guarantees of when you import it, like ideas from functional programming, then like this could be the motivator of like, why would people use this? Cool. And then this is the other direction. So like, again, it's not hard code. This is if you take a JSON and you want to make it to a single row, but wow, we cut the number of lines of code in half. And it's like, oh, Eric, what's the big deal? Like ChatGPT is just going to write the code. Okay, imagine this, but like times 20, and you go to work and you open this file and you see 200 lines, right? It's like, what's the difference between 200 lines and 100 lines? Like that becomes a lot, or 1,000 lines and 500 lines, So that's the goal. And that's also maybe a barrier why it's hard to share. So I have a website and I read a lot about, or this is a big essay from the compiler class I took. So it's on there if anyone wants to read it, reach out about. All right, any questions? Okay, gonna try to breeze through the rest of it. Patient experience. Okay, so I probably know the least about this, but something I want to think more about. So there's a series on Netflix called Black Mirror. So have people watched Black Mirror? All right, cool. Yes, yes, yes. So we know what it is. All right, so it shows like the extremities of technology applied to society. So now will be an interesting question. So maybe I can get a raise of hands. Do people think, how many people think it's, so the argument is it technology that's just like puppet master, or is it just like people and technology enables it? So how many people think, it's like the tech is the problem, like it's the puppet master? Okay, how many people think it's the people? Okay, like, yeah, what about neither?
Technologies,
Yeah,
humans for making the technology or the puppet masters, like, they're not incentivizing us to do the right thing, they're just incentivizing late stage capitalism.
yep,
Healthcare.
yep,
But humans will push back on that to say like, hey, no, maybe not this way, and try to find other ways to go around it.
yeah,
So it's not like a static thing. It's not just like nature and nurture, like those
yeah.
two things.
Right, it's like people make the technology.
Safe.
Yeah.
for the EHR, so like what's next? So there's
Yeah.
like satisfaction.
Yep, it's hard to say. It's a blurred line. That's what makes the series interesting. Um, so yeah, I think it's the people side. Because really like technology, there is an argument, and there's a book I'll mention later called Stolen Focus of like, okay, there are these a lot of insidious behavior things kind of drilled into our technology, but also I don't know, people will do what they want. All right, I also feel like software just reflects like the energy you put into it. So when you say like something has good vibes, it might be like the energy of something, but also how you feel about it, right? And everyone is entitled to their own feelings. But also there's this like external energy. So it's kind of like writing too. Like I think software is a lot like writing. It's like how you express your thoughts, and you can tell like there's a certain amount of writing, like you can tell like someone really put a lot of thought into it and really cared about it. With a certain type of writing, you get an email, and it's like, okay, well, like yeah, I never want to see this again either. Um, okay. So that was like maybe the technology accelerates is extension of people, like it's a people thing. So if it is a people thing, like what is a healthy behavior? Like how can we think more healthily? So well, I think maybe health is like how we are physiologically. And that's also includes how our brains like kind of fire synapses. So that'll be mentally, but also how we maybe feel about other things like spiritually. And the hard thing about health is usually like no one like it's hard to think about initially, but once it is a problem, then it's the most important thing, right? And a lot of people can agree on that. And now it's a prevention is worth a pound of cure. But the hard thing is like, how do you motivate? What's it? How do you motivate people to feel better? Okay, so I think wellness empirically, like I don't know if this is formal. Like the way I view it is like it's your health, but also how you feel about it. So I could be physically healthy, but I could feel like, like man, like Eric, you're not doing shit. So then like I might be healthy, but I might not feel well, right? Um, and wellness also depends on values, like for me, it's like, man, like if wellness to me means like I can do, 500 pull-ups, then maybe I'll never be well, right? Uh, so then, so then maybe like that's something we can change. Yeah, but it's also something that's important to respect like people's values and how they feel wherever they're at. So as a thought experiment, like, and we're almost at time, so I won't belabor people, but maybe think to yourself, what's an unhealthy behavior? What's a healthy behavior? What's something you feel like you should be doing? And also, why do we need to use the word should, right? It just feels so normal to be like, man, I should do this, or it's like I should be running more, I should be like playing basketball or whatever, or should be catch up with my friends. Why is this so normal? And really, like healthy behaviors are hard, but also there's like a culture of like shame around a lot of these things. There's some arguments like people say like, oh, technology kind of bakes us in and like kind of pushes us certain ways. There's an argument where actually it's like if you're not being intentional about it, it will just steer you wherever. But if you are intentional, there might be ways to fight it. But it's hard because it's very systemic. There was there's a conference that happens, Stanford Big Idea in Medicine. It's pretty cheap for students, so recommend it. And they Vivek Murthy is like the U.S. Surgeon General. So he talks about like there's a loneliness like epidemic, which is a big problem. Like, as people get more connected on our phones, like it's hard to see people in person, especially after COVID. That's a big problem. And then, so you might see a picture on the left and be like, man, like, why does this guy love his Fruit Loops? But then maybe we could say, like, you know what? Like, enjoy the cereal, man. But also get some fiber when you can. All right. So how do people stay healthy? Is it drugs? Is it like GLP-1s, right? It's like that's raked a lot of money. But maybe not. Maybe there are other ways, right? Like, maybe you can get people the right information at the right time that's personalized for them. But people do this already, and it's hard to too. It's like just because you have information doesn't mean you do the right thing. There's also maybe like broader community things. So I TA'd, I'll talk about this later, but I TA'd like design for healthy behaviors here, and we like hosted this little thing, and there's like different like communities. So one of them is called Dad Strength. It's just this guy based in Toronto. He just organized a community of dads. Just like, okay, how can we like be better parents, but also like kind of support each other on dad things and like have like these little wellness groups and like work out together, that sort of stuff. There's a camp called the Go and Error Camp. It's like a summer camp for kids, and they've done a really good things of like, okay, in a world where people are just like so tied to technology, how can you get kids outside again and like, you know, enjoy that kind of thing. So yeah, there are like these curated experiences. It might be hard to find if you don't look for it. So then and also it depends on your values, right? And we need to respect everyone's values. Okay, so I think a fun story over break. So I was catching up with my mom, and she was like, "Oh, Eric, what do you want to do after college?" I'm like, yeah, you know, I have all these ideas. I want to see it through. It needs to be this big thing, yada yada." And she's like, "Eric, you have it so complicated. You have all these big visions. I have a little vision. You know, like for me, I want you, Victoria, my older sister, and me. We all live 1 hour from each other. And we get lunch every weekend." And I was like, "Man, that's a good vision. You know, like, you know, because it's good to have big visions, but maybe you need some little vision sometime." And when I thought about her little vision, it like brought me back to like, okay, like why am I doing all these things and like jumping through all these hoops? And maybe there are like these little sub goals. It's like, you know what, it is worth shooting for that first and going for that. So this is the idea. There's a popular idea of like tiny habits are the things that change these broader, you know, systemic behaviors. Small actions, as you know, compound. And that's basically how all large change happens. You can break them down into small little changes. So how can we frame it better? There are these books, Tiny Habits, Atomic Habits. Yeah, so a couple more ideas and then we'll bounce. Is aligning incentives enough? So like doing like healthcare startup-y stuff. Like how do we get people to change behaviors? Well, you know, everyone's told me like you go to like a panel and like, you know, Andreessen Horowitz hosting or something, and they get everyone here and they're like someone on the panel says aligning incentives. Everyone nods their heads. Ah, yes, 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 yes. The doctor says yes, the business person says yes, the researcher says yes, align incentives, and then everything's fixed, right? But the problem is, okay, a lot of these incentives, like once you aligned it, has it changed the system? Well, you've maybe done a lot of good within it, which is good. But if people really want to change the system, maybe you need to fix incentives instead of align incentives, because aligning incentives will keep the system. So given that, it's just like, yeah, like can we align incentives for people, or maybe some incentives we got to fix it to think differently about it. And it's hard to do these things, but it's also good to be kind and push each other to do better. So things we think about now, you know, the system needs to keep the lights on. It's not all evil. So a lot of important work goes into that. But maybe there are opportunities to, you know, expand and for the people that are fighting the good fight and are jaded within the systems, maybe there's ways to zoom out and say like, okay, maybe we can rethink these parts, or maybe this is a way we can chip away at X, Y, Z. And for healthy behaviors, yeah, like it's like it really can just start small, you know, help someone out. That could be you. Maybe you help yourself out one day and you're like, yeah, like I want to do this thing. Fuck it, I'll just do it. And maybe it could be a friend. It's like, you know, I reach out to a good friend that I haven't seen in a while, or maybe I do see. So if you're interested in more, like I TA'd the class Design for Healthy Behaviors. It's in the winter. It's a fun class, fun and easy, and also cool. So Pooja, she's the TA, so reach out to her. And there's me. So I TA'd last quarter, and I was there in the winter. So yeah, to close, how can we make EHRs feel happy? All right, thank you, everyone. All right, any questions or comments? Cool, awesome. Well, thank you all for making it. I know it's week 10 is busy. Feel free to grab some food and grab some stickers.
How's it going?
Yo. Good. Let's make it.
I love the sticker.